Hey guys, my name is Cody Barna. I'm a local real estate agent here in New Hampshire with eXp Realty. In today's video, we're going to talk about the differences of living on the East Coast versus the West Coast. And if you're new to my channel, I appreciate you stopping by. If you have any suggestions for videos, be sure to leave a comment down below and I'll make sure I get to those. Starting off, we'll compare some of the jobs on the East Coast versus the West Coast. On the East Coast, you'll find more traditional jobs like a doctor, a lawyer, nurse, or an accountant. Whereas on the West Coast, a lot of people work more entrepreneurial style jobs, freelancing, they'll have multiple side hustles, part-time jobs in the evening while working a full-time job during the day. And this is just because of the nature of the city. But I would say if you live in some of the bigger, more populated areas like New York City, it's going to be more comparable. Once you get to the outskirts that are relatively far from the city, that's when you're gonna have a tough time finding jobs that pay a significant amount of money. Next is the food. On the East Coast, you're definitely gonna find a lot more options that are rich in oil and butter and a lot of saturated fat, a lot of pizza, eggs, cheese, bread, very, very carb heavy, not considered the most healthy food versus the West Coast, which is definitely more health oriented. You're gonna have a lot of salads, a lot of fresh produce, and they're definitely gonna cater more to specific diets like vegan and vegetarian. Whereas on the East Coast, it can be more difficult to find those options. And that could be attributed to the weather. The weather being nice year round on the West Coast, you have the ability to get that fresh produce versus on the East Coast where we have the winter. So sometimes there's things that are out of season, but overall I would give the food to the West Coast for being overall more healthy and somewhat more tasty. The next one being probably the biggest downside for most people, and that's the weather. On the East Coast, you definitely have the 4 seasons, but the seasons are more drastic. Your summers can be humid depending upon where you live. The falls can be the most moderate time of the year. And then you have the winters, which can be really, really cold. And then the springs are typically pretty rainy. So you have the seasons, but they're very drastic among each one. Versus on the West Coast, if you do get seasons, depending upon what area you live in, they're not very drastic. It's pretty moderate, throughout the whole year, where it could be warm in the fall, spring, and then the summer could just be a little bit warmer. But it's really hard to tell because it's nice year round at that point. I'd also say the West Coast is typically drier in the summer than it is on the East Coast. On the East Coast, it can get pretty humid, especially if you work your way down south. But even in the areas on the East Coast, all the way over to New Hampshire, Maine, their summers can be pretty humid. Next, we're going to talk about the personalities between the East and the West Coast. I'd say for the most part, the East Coast gets a bad rap for being unfriendly, which could be attributed to a lot of people that are more direct and, maybe not as friendly in certain times of the year. In the winter time, it can be cold and people can be in a bad mood because of that. Whereas on the West Coast, when it's warm year round, everybody's in a better mood. They're happy. They're more laid back, easygoing, but that can be different depending upon the areas you go to. Specifically California, you have Los Angeles, and then you have San Diego. I would say the people are more laid back in San Diego versus Los Angeles, which could be the same if you're comparing the East Coast. For example, if you're in New York City, the people are typically more direct and to the point, and they can come off as less friendly. Whereas if you were in one of the suburbs further away from the city, the people might be more relaxed and easygoing, and you might get that feeling that everybody's in a better mood and more happy. Next, I would say this is a really big one for a lot of people, and that's the cost of living. Now, if you're comparing city to city, whereas we're looking at New York City versus LA, it's going to be pretty close there. I think New York takes the number one spot for that. But when you look at the suburbs and areas and states surrounding those areas, that's when it becomes a pretty drastic difference. If you're looking on the East Coast and specifically New Hampshire, because that's where I'm from, you have a lot of areas within the state that are relatively affordable versus looking at California In the city, it's very, very expensive, but even when you work your way away from the city, the home prices are still pretty expensive compared to the East Coast. Also, you have utilities, gas prices are significantly more on the West Coast, and just overall, the cost of living is a lot more with taxes involved when comparing the East and the West. I will say it's more comparable if you start to shop in other states, because you have areas like Las Vegas, Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico. That's when you're gonna find prices that are more comparable to some of the states on the East Coast. And the final one I'm gonna cover, because I can personally relate to this one really well, is the activities. On the East Coast, activities typically are gonna be more winter-based, so you'll have skiing, snowboarding, sledding, snowmobiling, snowshoeing, cross-country skiing. When the winters are longer and it's colder for a longer period of time, people like to get outside and do certain things, whether it's hiking. Whereas on the West Coast, a lot of the sports are revolving around the outdoors and the warm weather. So you might have skateboarding, baseball, golf, soccer. Whereas you can play those sports on the East Coast, but the season is much, much shorter. So typically, when you look at professional athletes and where they were raised, a lot of those pro athletes that are playing sports like golf and baseball and football are coming from the West Coast, just because of the fact that they have that much more time that they can dedicate to their sport. I can personally attest to this. Growing up, I was a freestyle skier, and I pretty much spent all my time practicing and working on that, along with other sports that I played in the summertime, but I never was really able to dedicate as much time to those. Whereas if I would have lived on the West Coast, I guarantee I would have played a sport like golf year round, or something that didn't have an off season because of the nice weather year round. And that wraps up the video, guys. Pretty much just comparing the East Coast to the West Coast and some of the differences that I've seen. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I made it a little more raw than my other videos. Let me know in the comments below if you like this style of video. But otherwise, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.